The rain had stopped, but she hadn't noticed through the tears until she realized her face was still wet while her hair was no longer being soaked. Jolene McAllister sat on the wet grass of the cemetery, knees pulled to her chest, still wearing her scrubs under her jacket. The green fabric was stained with coffee and something darker that she didn't want to think about. Her shift had ended 3 hours ago, but she couldn't go home. Couldn't face the empty apartment where she'd have to think about the girl on the table. 16 years old, blonde hair matted with blood, a drunk driver who'd walked away without a scratch. They'd worked on her for 40 minutes. Jolene had been the one to call it. She'd driven to the cemetery because it was the only place open at 3 in the morning besides bars and gas stations, and she needed to be somewhere that acknowledged death without pretending it was anything but what it was. Her parents were buried in America. This was just a place in Lyon where the dead rested, where she could sit and remember that loss was universal. The umbrella cast a shadow over her in the streetlight's glow. She looked up slowly, her red-rimmed eyes adjusting to see the figure standing behind her. He was tall, impossibly so, dressed in a long black coat that belonged to a different century despite its modern cut. His skin was pale, almost luminescent in the darkness, and his hair fell past his shoulders in a cascade of pure white that seemed to gather what little light existed. His face was sharp, aristocratic, with high cheekbones and a jaw that could have been carved from marble. His eyes were dark, almost black, and they looked at her with an intensity that should have frightened her, but instead made her feel seen for the first time all night. He said nothing, just held the umbrella over her while the rain continued to fall everywhere else. Jolene stared at him for a long moment, then looked away. She didn't have energy for conversation, for explanations, for the inevitable questions about why she was crying alone in a cemetery in the middle of the night. She expected him to ask. Everyone always asked. He didn't. He just stood there, keeping the rain off her, silent as the graves around them. Minutes passed. 5, then 10. The rain began to lighten, turning from a downpour to a drizzle. Jolene's breathing slowly steadied. The tears stopped, leaving her face sticky and her eyes burning. She felt empty, hollowed out, but the sharp edge of grief had dulled to something she could carry. "I should go," she said finally, her voice rough. She didn't look at him. The umbrella shifted slightly. When she glanced up again, he'd stepped back, giving her space to stand. She pushed herself up from the wet grass, her legs stiff from sitting in the cold. Her car was parked on the street outside the cemetery gates, a small blue sedan that had seen better days. She walked, and he walked beside her, still holding the umbrella despite the rain having slowed to almost nothing. She wanted to tell him she didn't need it anymore, but the words stuck in her throat. Something about his presence was oddly comforting, like having a guard dog you hadn't asked for but were grateful to have. When they reached her car, she turned to face him. He was even taller than she'd thought, at least 6.5 feet, and the way he stood radiated a kind of authority that made her feel small. Not diminished, just aware of the space he occupied, the weight of his existence. "Thank you," she managed. He inclined his head slightly, a gesture that felt formal, old-fashioned. Then he stepped back and she realized she didn't even know his name. "Wait, she started, but when she blinked, he was gone. Simply gone, as if he'd never been there at all. The street was empty except for parked cars and distant streetlights. The rain had stopped completely. Jolene stood there for a moment, keys in hand, wondering if she'd hallucinated the entire encounter. But no, the grass where she'd been sitting was still pressed down, and there were footprints beside hers leading to the car. Large footprints that disappeared halfway down the block. She got in her car and drove home, and she didn't let herself think about it. There were too many other things to think about already. The next night, she left the hospital at 2:30 in the morning after another long shift. This one had been better, routine cases, nothing traumatic, just exhaustion that lived in her bones. She'd been working nights for 6 months now, ever since she'd transferred to Lyon for the research opportunities at Hôpital de la Croix-Rousse. The night shift paid more, and there were fewer people asking questions about why a 24-year-old surgical nurse from Seattle had moved across an ocean alone. She didn't plan to go back to the cemetery, but her car seemed to drive itself there, and she found herself standing at the gates, looking in at the rows of headstones. He was there, standing under a tree near where she'd sat the night before. No umbrella this time because the sky was clear. When he saw her, he didn't move, didn't approach, just watched her with those dark eyes. Jolene walked toward him before she could question the impulse. When she was a few feet away, she stopped. "Do you come here often, or was last night a coincidence?" "Often." His voice was deep, accented in a way she couldn't place. Not quite French, though he spoke French, something older underneath it. "It's a strange place to spend your nights." "I could say the same to you." "Fair point." She looked around at the cemetery, at the peaceful darkness. "I'm Jolene McAllister." He hesitated, as if weighing whether to answer. "Quillon O'Barian. That's quite a name." "It's quite old." Something about the way he said it made her believe him. He looked ageless, anywhere from 25 to 50, with the kind of face that could belong to any era. "Are you from Lyon?" "Originally." He moved then, a slight shift of his weight that drew her attention to the way he held himself. Perfect posture, coiled stillness, like a predator conserving energy. "You're not." "Seattle. I moved here 6 months ago for work." "The hospital. You could smell it on me last night?" She tried to make it light, joking, but he just nodded. "Disinfectant, coffee, blood." Most people wouldn't have admitted to the last one. Jolene studied him, this strange man who appeared in cemeteries at night and said things like they were simple facts. "What do you do, Quillon O'Barian?" "I manage certain resources, ensure systems run smoothly." "That's vague." "Yes." She almost laughed. "Are you always this cryptic?" "Usually more so." This time she did laugh, a short, surprised sound. It felt good, surprising. She couldn't remember the last time she'd laughed. "Well, thanks for the umbrella last night, and for not asking questions." "You're welcome." They stood in silence for a while. It should have been awkward, but it wasn't. There was something peaceful about it, about standing in the darkness with someone who didn't need her to be anything other than present. "I should go," she said eventually. "Early shift tomorrow, or tonight. Time is weird when you work nights." "It is," he agreed. She turned to leave, then paused. "Will you be here tomorrow?" "If you want me to be." The answer was too honest, too direct. It made something flutter in her chest that she'd thought was dead. "Maybe," she said, and walked back to her car. He was there the next night, and the night after that. It became a routine over the following weeks. She'd finish her shift, drive to the cemetery, and find him waiting. They'd walk among the graves, sometimes talking, often not. He asked her about her work, and she told him about the patients, the cases, the small victories and large frustrations of trying to save people who didn't always want to be saved. He told her about Lyon, about its history, about buildings that no longer existed and streets that had changed names a dozen times. He spoke about the past like he'd lived it, and she stopped questioning how he knew so much. She learned that he never ate when she invited him for coffee, that he only came out at night, that he moved with a grace that seemed inhuman. She noticed his skin was cold when their hands accidentally brushed, that his eyes sometimes caught the light strangely, reflecting it back like an animal's. She noticed all of it and didn't let herself draw conclusions because the conclusions were impossible. "Why do you come here every night?" she asked him one evening, 3 weeks into their strange friendship. They were sitting on a bench near the cemetery's back wall, watching the sky lighten from black to deep blue. Dawn was still an hour away. "It's quiet," he said, "and the dead don't ask questions." "I ask questions. You ask the right ones." She turned to look at him. "What does that mean?" "You ask what I think, not what I am." He was watching the horizon, his profile sharp against the trees. "Most people do it backward. Maybe I don't care what you are." "You should." There was something heavy in his voice, a warning. "Are you dangerous?" The question should have scared her, but it didn't. He turned to meet her eyes. Yes. Are you dangerous to me? No. Then I don't care. Something shifted in his expression, a crack in the careful mask. You're naive. I'm practical. You've had 3 weeks to hurt me if you wanted to. You've done the opposite. She thought of the night he'd walked her to her car, when a drunk man had been shouting on the street, the way Quillon had simply placed himself between her and the threat until the man wandered away. The night it had rained again, and he'd somehow produced an umbrella from nowhere. The night she'd been so tired she'd fallen asleep on the bench and woken at dawn to find her jacket draped over her like a blanket and Quillon gone. You've been kind. Kindness isn't safety. Maybe not, but it's enough for me. He looked at her for a long moment, and she couldn't read his expression. Then he stood, smooth and sudden. Dawn is close. You should go home. Come with me. The words were out before she thought them through. I mean, for coffee, or tea, or just to sit somewhere that isn't a cemetery. My apartment isn't far. I can't. Why not? The sun will rise soon. So? It's not like you'll turn into a pumpkin. She tried to make it light, but he didn't smile. Something like that. He was already backing away, moving toward the shadows under the trees. Go home, Jolene. Sleep. Will you be here tonight? Yes. He disappeared into the darkness, and she was left sitting on the bench, watching the sky turn purple and gold. She went home. She slept. But the questions followed her into her dreams. The paperwork crossed her desk on a Tuesday night, routine and boring until she saw the signature. She was working in the administrative section of the hospital, covering for someone on break, sorting through donation records and supply orders. The blood bank received donations from several sources, including a private foundation that had been contributing since the hospital's records began. The foundation's name was Les Ombres Éternelles, the Eternal Shadows, which struck her as pretentious until she saw the signature on the latest shipping manifest, Quillon Oberyon. Her hands stilled on the paper. The signature was flowing, old-fashioned, done with a fountain pen. Below it was a seal she didn't recognize, a crest with a crown and crossed swords. The shipment was scheduled for that night, coming in through the service entrance at 4 a.m. She looked at the date of the first entry in the ledger, June 1902. Her heart was hammering. She pulled up the hospital's historical records on the computer, searching for any mention of the foundation. What she found made her skin go cold. The Nightwing had been endowed in 1902 by an anonymous donor who'd established a trust to maintain and expand it in perpetuity. The same donor had funded research into rare blood disorders, had contributed to medical advances that saved thousands of lives. The trust was managed by Les Ombres Éternelles. The representative who'd signed all the historical documents had the same handwriting as Quillon's signature. She sat back in her chair, staring at the screen. It wasn't possible. No one lived that long. But the evidence was in front of her, and suddenly all the strange pieces made sense. The way he moved, the cold skin, the fact that he only came out at night and disappeared before dawn, the knowledge of history that came from living it, the old-fashioned formality that wasn't an affectation but a habit from another time. Quillon Oberyon was a vampire. She should have been terrified. She should have run. Instead, she waited until her shift ended at 4 and went down to the service entrance. The delivery truck was there, unmarked and black. 2 men were unloading crates marked with the foundation's seal. They were both pale, white-haired, moving with the same inhuman grace as Quillon, and Quillon was there, standing to the side, overseeing the delivery. He was dressed in a suit, black and impeccable, looking like he'd stepped out of a boardroom or a throne room. When he saw her, he went very still. The other 2 vampires noticed his reaction and turned to look at her. One of them, shorter with sharp features and gold eyes, stepped forward. Who is this? No one, Quillon said, but his voice was tight. She works here. The gold-eyed vampire moved closer to Jolene, inhaling slightly. She smells of you. Old scent, Weeks old. How interesting. Lysander, go inside. It wasn't a request. Lysander's smile was full of teeth. The court will want to know about this. The court doesn't need to know anything. Quillon moved then, faster than Jolene could track, placing himself between her and Lysander. Take the delivery inside. I'll handle this. Will you? Lysander looked amused. She knows what you are. I can see it in her eyes. That's a breach of protocol, my lord. My lord. The title hung in the air like a bomb. I said go inside. This time, Quillon's voice carried weight, power, something that made the air feel heavy. Lysander's smile faded, and he bowed slightly, mockingly, before gesturing to the other vampire. They picked up the crates and carried them into the hospital, moving too fast to be human. When they were gone, Quillon turned to Jolene. You shouldn't be here. You're a vampire. Her voice was surprisingly steady. And you're some kind of... What, Lord? King? He closed his eyes briefly. It's complicated. Uncomplicated. I can't. He looked at her, and there was something like pain in his eyes. You were never supposed to know. This was never supposed to... He stopped himself. You need to forget you saw this. That's not how memory works. For humans, no, but there are ways. The implication made her stomach drop. You're going to make me forget? I should, but you won't. She said it with more confidence than she felt. He looked at her for a long moment. No, he said finally. I won't. But you need to leave, Jolene. Go home. Don't come to the cemetery anymore. Don't look for me. Why not? Because you knowing what I am puts you in danger. The court has laws about humans who know our secrets. If they decide you're a risk... He didn't finish the sentence. What court? What are you talking about? Go home. He was already turning away, his coat swirling around him like shadows. Please. She watched him walk into the hospital, disappearing through the service entrance. For a moment she stood there, frozen. Then she turned and walked to her car, her mind racing. She didn't go home. She went to the hospital's archives instead, pulling up every record she could find about Les Ombres Éternelles. The foundation had contributed millions of euros over the decades. It had funded entire wings, endowed research chairs, paid for equipment that saved lives, and it had all been overseen by the same careful hand, the same signature that barely changed over 120 years. She found photographs from the hospital's centennial celebration in 2002. In the background of one photo, barely visible, was a man in a black suit with white hair. Quillon. He looked exactly the same as he did now. She printed the photo and stared at it. Then she went home, finally, as the sun was rising. She collapsed into bed but didn't sleep. Just lay there, staring at the ceiling, thinking about a man who'd held an umbrella over her in the rain, who'd kept her company in a cemetery for weeks, who'd been quietly saving lives for over a century while hiding in the shadows. She thought about the way he'd looked at her that morning, the pain in his eyes when he'd told her to leave. She thought about the court he'd mentioned, the danger he'd warned her about, and she decided she wasn't going anywhere. That night she went to the cemetery at the usual time. He wasn't there. She waited for an hour, then 2, walking through the paths they'd walked together, sitting on the bench where they'd talked. The cemetery was empty, silent except for the sound of wind in the trees. She went back the next night. And the next. A week passed with no sign of him. She started asking questions at the hospital, carefully, obliquely, about the foundation, about the night deliveries, about the history of the night wing. People knew surprisingly little. The foundation was private, secretive. The deliveries had always happened as long as anyone could remember. The night wing had always been funded, always been the best equipped in the city. On the 8th night, she was sitting on their bench when she heard footsteps behind her. She turned, hoping to see Quillon, but it was the other vampire from the delivery, the one with gold eyes. Lysander. You're persistent, he said, stopping a few feet away. Foolish, but persistent. Where is he? Dealing with problems you created. Lysander sat down on the bench, uninvited, studying her with unnerving intensity. Did you know the court has laws about humans who learn of our existence? The punishment is usually death. Quick, clean, merciful, but sometimes if the human has value, we offer a choice. Serve the court or die. Is that what you're here to do? Offer me a choice? No. I'm here to understand why Quillon, the vampire king of Lyon, who has followed every law of our kind for 6 centuries, is suddenly breaking all of them for a human nurse he barely knows. Vampire king. The words hit her like a punch. He's the king? You didn't know? Lysander's laugh was sharp. Of course you didn't. He wouldn't tell you. Too honorable, too bound by duty. He leaned back on the bench, looking up at the stars. He's been king of this city since 1523. Before that, he was a warlord, a knight, a dozen other things. He's old, powerful, and utterly committed to the laws that keep our kind hidden and safe. Until you. I didn't ask him to break any laws. You existed. That was enough. Lysander turned his gold eyes on her. The court wants you dead or bound. Quillon is refusing both options. He's calling in favors, making deals, trying to find a third way. It's causing chaos. Other lords smell weakness. Some are suggesting he's unfit to rule if he can't control a single human. Jolene's chest tightened. I'll leave Lyon. I'll go back to America. He can tell everyone he made me forget, or whatever you do. I won't say anything. I won't. Too late for that. The court knows. And there's something else. Lysander's expression turned serious. We have a problem. Someone is contaminating our blood supply. The Foundation manages legal donations from willing humans, blood that's taken safely and paid for fairly. It's how we survive without hunting. But recently, the blood has been tainted. Small amounts of silver, not enough to kill, but enough to make us sick. Weak. Who would do that? Someone who wants to return to the old ways. Before laws, before treaties, when we took what we needed from humans, whether they consented or not. He stood up, smooth and sudden. There's a lord named Draven. He's ancient, powerful, and he believes we've grown soft by relying on donations. He wants to overturn the blood laws, make hunting legal again. If he can prove the legal supply is unreliable, unsafe, he might get enough votes in the court to do it. What does this have to do with me? You're a surgical nurse. You understand blood, disease, contamination. Quillon thinks you can help us find the source, prove it's sabotage and not a failure of the donation system. Lysander moved closer, his gold eyes intense. He's willing to bring a human into the heart of the vampire court, to trust you with our secrets, to make you the first human physician to our kind, all to protect both our species from a war that would destroy thousands. And if I say no, then Draven wins. The blood laws fall, humans become prey again, and the hunters who've been sleeping for centuries will wake up and try to destroy us all. A war that will spill into your hospitals, your streets, your homes. He paused. And Quillon will be forced by court law to either execute you or wipe your memory so completely you won't remember your own name. Those are the only options once a human knows what we are and refuses to serve. Jolene's mind raced. It was insane, all of it. Vampires, courts, contaminated blood supplies, ancient laws. But she thought of the 16-year-old girl who died on her table, of all the patients she'd fought to save, of the hospital wing that had been funded for 120 years by a vampire king who'd been trying to make things better. Where is he? She asked quietly. The court. Beneath the city. I can take you, but once you enter, you're committed. There's no leaving, no changing your mind. You'll see things that will terrify you. You'll be surrounded by creatures who consider you food. And if you fail to find the contamination source, you'll die with the rest of us when the blood sickness spreads. When do we leave? Lysander studied her for a moment, then nodded slowly. Now. He led her to a car parked outside the cemetery, a sleek black vehicle that was probably worth more than she'd make in 5 years. They drove through Lyon's streets in silence, heading away from the river toward the old part of the city. He parked in front of what looked like an abandoned church, its Gothic facade crumbling and covered in graffiti. This is it? She asked. Appearances, Lysander said, getting out of the car. Follow me, stay close, don't speak unless spoken to, and don't stare. Most of the court has never seen a living human up close. They went through the church's broken doors into darkness. Lysander moved confidently, and Jolene followed the pale glow of his hair, her eyes slowly adjusting. At the back of the church, behind where the altar once stood, was a staircase leading down. Down and down, spiraling deep into the earth. The stairs ended in a corridor lit by torches that burned with strange blue flames. The walls were stone, ancient, carved with symbols she didn't recognize. The air was cold and smelled of earth and something else, something sweet and metallic, blood. Lysander led her through a maze of corridors, past doorways that opened into rooms filled with treasures, libraries, what looked like an armory stocked with swords and weapons from every era. Finally, they emerged into a massive chamber that stole her breath. It was a throne room from another time, all soaring arches and carved pillars, lit by hundreds of the strange blue flames in chandeliers that hung from the distant ceiling. The floor was polished black marble, and at the far end of the chamber was a throne of dark wood and metal, intricate and imposing. And everywhere, vampires. Dozens of them, all pale-skinned and white-haired, dressed in clothing that ranged from medieval gowns to modern suits. They turned as one when Lysander and Jolene entered, their eyes reflecting the blue firelight like animals. On the throne sat Quillon. He looked different here. Not just the formal black clothing, the crown of dark metal resting on his white hair, or the way he sat with absolute authority. It was his presence, the weight of power that radiated from him. This was a king, ancient and undisputed, and the way every vampire in the room watched him showed that they knew it. When he saw Jolene, his composure cracked for just a second. His eyes widened and he half rose from the throne before catching himself. What is she doing here? Lysander bowed low. She came of her own will, my lord. I informed her of the situation. She wishes to help. No. Quillon was standing now, descending the steps from the throne platform. Absolutely not. Take her out of here, now. You know I can't do that. An elderly vampire stepped forward from the crowd, his face lined in a way that suggested he'd been turned when he was very old. She's seen the court. She knows our location. The law is clear. The law allows exceptions, Matthias. Quillon's voice was hard. Only if she swears service. Blood oath witnessed by the court. Matthias looked at Jolene with cold appraisal. Is she willing? She doesn't understand what that means, Quillon said before Jolene could answer. She's human. She doesn't know our ways. Then explain them, another vampire called out, this one a woman with long white hair braided with gold. Let her choose with full knowledge, as the law requires. Quillon's jaw tightened. He turned to Jolene, and the other vampires fell silent, watching. A blood oath means you serve the court until you die. You become our physician, our healer, bound by magic and blood to protect our secrets and serve our needs. You cannot break the oath without dying. You cannot leave Lyon without permission. You become property of the court. Not property, Lysander interjected. Protected, valued, but bound, yes. And if I don't swear? Jolene asked, keeping her voice steady despite her racing heart. You die, or you forget everything, your memory torn apart until there's nothing left of who you are. Quillon looked like each word hurt him. Those are the only options, and I won't let them destroy your mind, so if you won't swear, I'll make it quick, painless, I promise. The room was utterly silent. Jolene looked around at the assembled vampires, at their inhuman beauty and predatory stillness. She thought about what Lysander had told her, about the contaminated blood and the threat of war. She thought about the hospital wing that Quillon had funded for 120 years, about the lives saved, the research advanced. She thought about a man holding an umbrella over her in the rain, asking nothing, giving comfort in the darkness. I'll swear, she said. No. Quillon moved toward her, and the other vampires shifted, tense. Jolene, you don't understand what you're giving up. Your freedom, your life, everything. I understand that people will die if I don't help. Human and vampire both. I understand that you've been trying to make things better, to find a way for both species to coexist. I understand that I might be able to help with that. She met his dark eyes. And I understand that you were willing to protect me even when it cost you everything. Let me do the same for you. Something in his expression broke, a wall crumbling to show the emotion beneath. Before he could respond, Matthias stepped forward. The oath must be sworn in blood and witnessed, my lord, if you would. Quillon looked at Jolene for a long moment, and she saw the conflict in his eyes, the war between duty and something else. Then he nodded once, sharply. Bring the oath cup. A vampire stepped forward with a chalice made of dark metal, its surface engraved with symbols that seemed to move in the flickering light. Quillon took it, then produced a small knife from somewhere. Give me your hand. Jolene extended her hand, trying not to shake. Quillon took it gently, his skin cold against hers. The knife was sharp. She barely felt the cut across her palm. Blood welled up, red and bright, and he tilted her hand to let it drip into the cup. Speak the words, Matthias said. I, Jolene McAllister, swear by blood and life to serve the court of Lyon, to protect its secrets, to honor its laws, until death releases me. Jolene repeated the words, her voice echoing in the vast chamber. As she spoke, she felt something shift, like hooks catching in her chest, binding her to the words. The sensation was uncomfortable, foreign, but not painful. When she finished, Quillon cut his own palm, mixing his blood with hers in the cup. Then he raised it to his lips and drank. When he lowered the chalice, his eyes were glowing faintly red. I, Quillon Oberian, King of Lyon, accept Jolene McAllister into the court service. Let her be protected as one of ours, valued for her skills, and bound to us until death. The other vampires echoed, until death. The hooks in her chest tightened, then settled, becoming part of her. Jolene gasped slightly, and Quillon was immediately there, steadying her with a hand on her arm. It will pass. The bond takes a moment to settle. I'm okay, she managed. I'm okay. He didn't let go. You're a fool. A brave, stubborn, remarkable fool. Takes one to know one, she said, and some of the vampires laughed, the tension in the room easing. Matthias stepped forward again. Now that the formalities are done, perhaps we can address the actual crisis. My lord, you claimed this human could help us identify the contamination source. I hope you were right. I need to see the blood supply, Jolene said, forcing herself to focus. The storage, the collection process, the chain of custody, everything. Lysander will show you, Quillon said. I need to address the court. He was right. There were protocols, procedures, things that needed to happen now that a human had been bound to the court. But as Lysander led her away, Jolene looked back to see Quillon watching her, his expression unreadable. The blood storage was beneath the throne room, a series of chambers kept cold by some means Jolene didn't understand. There were no refrigerators, no modern equipment, just stone shelves holding hundreds of glass bottles filled with blood. It was labeled and dated, organized with meticulous care. We collect from willing donors, Lysander explained as she examined the bottles. Humans who know what we are and choose to give blood in exchange for payment. It's all legal, all consensual. The Foundation manages it through front companies and private clinics. The blood is tested, stored, and distributed to the court members. It's how we've survived in the modern world without hunting. How much does each vampire need? About a liter a week on average. More for the older ones, less for the younger. The court has about 200 members in Lyon. 200 liters a week. Jolene did the math. That's a lot of donors. We pay well, and we screen carefully. No diseases, no drugs. The blood is cleaner than what you'd get in a hospital. He picked up a bottle, holding it to the light. Until recently. When did people start getting sick? About 3 months ago. At first we thought it was a flu, something minor. But it got worse. Vampires were weakening, some collapsing. We tested the blood and found traces of silver. Not enough to kill, but enough to poison slowly. Silver hurts you? It's toxic to our physiology. A small amount in the bloodstream causes pain, weakness. Larger amounts can kill. He set the bottle down. The question is how it's getting into the supply. We've tested the donors, checked the collection sites, examined the storage. Nothing. The silver appears only in the bottles, after collection but before distribution. Jolene examined the bottles more closely. They were old-fashioned, with cork stoppers sealed with wax. The wax was stamped with the Foundation's seal. Who has access to the bottles between collection and storage? The handlers, trusted members of the court who transport the blood from the clinics to here. Lysander's expression darkened. But they've all been interrogated thoroughly. None of them are responsible. What about Lord Draven, the one who wants to overturn the blood laws? He claims innocence, of course, but he's been pushing hard for a vote to legalize hunting again. He argues that the contamination proves the donation system has failed, that we can't trust human blood unless we take it ourselves. Can you test for silver in the blood at collection, before it's bottled? We don't have the equipment. Our methods are old, traditional. We can taste the difference once it's contaminated, but by then it's too late. Jolene thought for a moment. I can get equipment from the hospital, set up tests. If we sample the blood at every stage of the collection and storage process, we can pinpoint exactly where the contamination is happening. That would take time and resources. How much time do we have? Draven is calling for a vote in 3 days. If he wins, the blood laws are overturned and everything Quillon has built falls apart. Lysander looked at her seriously. We need proof of sabotage by then, or the court will assume the system is broken and side with Draven. Then we'd better get started. They worked through the night. Jolene made a list of equipment she needed, and Lysander arranged for it to be acquired. She didn't ask how. By dawn, she had a temporary lab set up in one of the storage chambers, filled with testing equipment that was probably stolen from 3 different hospitals. She didn't see Quillon. He was dealing with court politics, according to Lysander, trying to hold off Draven's push for a vote. But she felt his presence somewhere above her, like a weight in the air. She tested the blood samples systematically, working backward from the contaminated bottles to the source. The donors were clean. The blood at the collection sites was clean. The blood in the transport containers was clean, but once it was transferred into the storage bottles, the silver appeared. It's the bottles, she told Lysander on the second night, showing him the test results. Something in the bottles themselves is introducing the silver. That's impossible. These bottles have been used for decades. They're made of glass, sealed with cork and wax. There's nowhere for contamination to enter. Then someone is tampering with them? New bottles, maybe, that look the same but are treated with silver? She examined one under a magnifying glass. Look at the wax seal. See how it's slightly off-center? Like it's been removed and resealed? Lysander leaned in, his gold eyes narrowing. You're right, but who has access to the bottles before they're filled? Who prepares them for use? The handlers receive them from the supplier. They're supposed to inspect them before use, but... He trailed off, his expression darkening. The supplier. The contract was renegotiated 6 months ago. A new company, cheaper prices. Draven recommended them. Do you know where they're based? An industrial area north of the city. But if Draven is behind this, confronting him directly would be exactly what we need to do. Quillon's voice came from the doorway, making them both turn. He looked exhausted, his eyes shadowed, still wearing the formal clothing from court. If we can prove he's sabotaging the supply, we can have him exiled or executed. The vote will be cancelled. My lord, you should rest, Lysander said. You've been in court sessions for 48 hours straight. I'll rest when this is over. Quillon's gaze moved to Jolene, and his expression softened slightly. You found the source? I think so, but we need to verify it. She stood, wiping her hands on a cloth. The supplier Draven recommended is likely treating the bottles with silver. If we can get evidence, samples, documentation, then we go tonight, now. Quillon turned to Lysander. Gather a small team, discreet. We'll investigate the supplier and return before dawn with evidence. What about Draven? He'll know we're moving against him. Let him know. I'm tired of playing political games. There was steel in Quillon's voice, the authority of a king who'd ruled for centuries. If he's behind this, he's committed treason against the court. The punishment is death, and I'll deliver it myself." They left within the hour, a small group of vampires moving through Lyon's dark streets like shadows. Jolene rode with Quillon, the two of them silent in the back of the car while Lysander drove. She could feel the tension radiating from him, coiled and dangerous. "You didn't have to involve yourself in this," he said finally, not looking at her. "You could have left Lyon, been safe. Would you have let them erase my memory?" "No, I would have let you go." His jaw tightened. "I should have the first night. I should never have come back to the cemetery. But you did. I couldn't stay away." He turned to look at her finally, and there was raw honesty in his eyes. "I've lived for 600 years, Jolene. I've seen empires rise and fall, watched centuries pass. I stopped feeling things a long time ago. And then I saw you crying in the rain, and something in me broke open. I don't know what you've done to me, but I can't let you go." Her breath caught. "Quillon, I know it's selfish. I know you deserve better than a monster who exists in the shadows, but I'm too old and too tired to be noble about this. You're the first thing I've wanted in 300 years, and I'll fight heaven and hell to keep you safe." Before she could respond, the car stopped. They'd arrived at the industrial complex, a cluster of warehouses in a desolate part of the city. Lysander parked in the shadows, and they all got out, moving silently toward the target building. The warehouse was locked, but that didn't slow the vampires down. Quillon simply tore the lock off the door, the metal shrieking briefly before falling silent. They slipped inside, Jolene following close behind. The interior was filled with crates and boxes, stacks of glass bottles like the ones used for blood storage. Jolene moved toward them, opening a crate. The bottles inside looked identical to the ones at the court, but when she held one up to the light, she could see a faint residue on the inside surface. "These are treated," she said. "Some kind of coating. I'd need to test it, but I'm betting it's silver compound. When blood sits in these bottles, the silver leaches into the liquid slowly." "Proof enough," Quillon said. "Lysander, photograph everything. We'll take samples back to the court." "Not so fast." The voice came from behind them, smooth and cold. They turned to see a vampire standing in the doorway, flanked by a dozen others. He was tall, white-haired like all the rest, but his eyes were a strange pale blue, and his face was harder, crueler. "Did you think I wouldn't notice you skulking around my property?" "Lord Draven." Quillon's voice was flat. "We have evidence of your sabotage. The court will see justice done." "Justice? You mean your justice, your laws, your pathetic treaty with humans." Draven moved further into the warehouse, his followers spreading out to surround Quillon's group. "I've watched you weaken our kind for centuries, Quillon. We used to be feared, respected. We took what we wanted. Now we beg humans for donations, live in hiding like rats. You've made us soft. I've kept us alive. The hunters would have destroyed us if we'd continued the old ways. The hunters are gone, dead or forgotten. There's no reason to hide anymore." Draven's gaze moved to Jolene, and his lip curled. "And now you bring a human into the heart of the court? Make her one of us? You've gone mad." "Touch her and I'll tear you apart," Quillon said quietly, and the temperature in the room seemed to drop. Draven laughed. "You can't kill me, Quillon. I'm a lord of the court. It would require a vote, a trial, all your precious procedures. By the time you get that organized, I'll have enough support to overthrow you. The other lords are already whispering that you're unfit to rule. Too distracted by a human pet. Too weak. Then let's settle this the old way." Quillon's voice was still quiet, but there was an edge to it that made Jolene's skin prickle. "Single combat. Now. The winner takes the throne and the loser's life." The other vampires in the room went very still. Lysander hissed, "My lord, that's not necessary." "It is." Quillon was already removing his coat, his movements deliberate. "I've played politics for centuries, Draven. Built systems, made laws, tried to be civilized. But underneath it all, I'm still what I was when I was turned. A knight, a warrior, and I'm tired of your scheming." Draven's smile widened. "Finally. I was beginning to think you'd forgotten how to fight. I accept your challenge." He shed his own coat, and Jolene saw that he was heavily muscled beneath it, built like a fighter. "When I win, the first thing I'll do is drain your little human dry. I want you to die knowing you failed her." Quillon moved. It was too fast for Jolene to follow. One moment he was standing still, the next he was on Draven, driving him back into the wall with enough force to crack the concrete. Draven recovered quickly, throwing Quillon off and lunging forward with inhuman speed. They fought like demons, faster and more brutal than anything Jolene had ever imagined. They were using no weapons, just their hands and their supernatural strength, tearing into each other with savage efficiency. Blood sprayed black in the dim light, and the warehouse echoed with the sounds of impact, bone breaking, metal shrieking as they smashed through crates and equipment. Jolene pressed back against Lysander, who'd placed himself between her and the fight. "He'll kill him," she whispered. "Draven is strong, but Quillon is the king for a reason." Lysander's voice was tense. "He's older, more experienced. He'll win." But as she watched, Jolene wasn't so sure. Draven was relentless, attacking with a fury that drove Quillon back step by step. Quillon was defending more than attacking, his movements careful, controlled. Too controlled. "He's holding back," she realized. "Why is he holding back? He doesn't want to lose himself. When we fight, truly fight, we become what we are. Predators, monsters. Quillon hates that part of himself." Lysander's jaw tightened. "But if he doesn't unleash it, Draven will kill him." Draven had Quillon pinned now, his hand around Quillon's throat, squeezing. "You've gone soft, old man. Centuries of pretending to be civilized have made you weak. You should have stayed a monster." Quillon's eyes met Jolene's across the room, and she saw the conflict there. The fear that if he let go, if he became the thing he'd spent centuries trying to rise above, he'd lose himself, lose her. "Do it!" she called out, her voice cutting through the chaos. "Quillon, do whatever you need to do. I'm not afraid of you." Something in his expression changed. The careful control shattered, and what emerged was terrifying. His eyes blazed red, and when he opened his mouth, his fangs were fully extended, longer than she'd seen on any of the other vampires. He grabbed Draven's wrist and twisted, the sound of bones snapping echoing through the warehouse. Draven screamed and tried to pull away, but Quillon was on him, moving with a speed and violence that was purely primal. There was no technique now, no strategy, just raw power and centuries of suppressed fury. It ended quickly after that. Quillon had Draven on the ground, his hand through Draven's chest, holding his heart. "You were right," Quillon said, his voice rough and inhuman. "I am a monster. I've always been a monster. But I'm a monster who learned to build instead of destroy, and you threatened what I built, what I protect." He pulled, and Draven's heart came free in a spray of black blood. Draven convulsed once, then went still, his body beginning to decay rapidly, turning to ash and dust. Within seconds, there was nothing left but a stain on the concrete floor. The other vampires who'd come with Draven immediately dropped to their knees, bowing their heads to Quillon. "My lord," they said in unison, "forgive us. We didn't know. Get out." Quillon's voice was still rough. "Go back to the court. Tell them what happened here. Tell them Lord Draven is dead, and the evidence of his treason will be presented at dawn." They fled, moving with vampire speed, desperate to escape. When they were gone, Quillon stood there for a moment, his hand still covered in blood, his chest heaving with unnecessary breaths. Then he turned and walked out of the warehouse without a word. Jolene started to follow, but Lysander caught her arm. "Give him a moment. He needs to process. He's hurt. He'll heal. But what he just did, letting the beast out, it's hard for him." Lysander released her arm. "Go to him, but carefully. He's not entirely in control yet." She found Quillon outside, standing in the shadows away from the warehouse. He was staring at his hand, the one that had held Draven's heart, his expression haunted. When she approached, he flinched away. Don't come near me right now. You're hurt." She could see the wounds on his chest, deep slashes that were bleeding. They were already healing, closing slowly, but they had to hurt. "I'll be fine. I just need—" He stopped, his jaw clenching. You should go back to the car. I'll follow in a moment. No. She moved closer, and this time he didn't pull away. You fought for me, for all of us. You did what you had to do. I killed him, tore his heart out with my bare hands while you watched. His voice was hollow. What must you think of me now? I think you're the bravest person I've ever met. She reached for his hand, the one covered in blood, and he let her take it. You've spent centuries trying to be better than your nature, building systems to protect both humans and vampires. And when someone threatened all of that, you did what a king has to do. You protected your people. I'm not a person, Jolene. I'm a dead thing that drinks blood to survive. A monster. You're the person who held an umbrella over me in the rain, who sat with me in a cemetery for weeks asking nothing in return, who funded a hospital wing for 120 years just to save lives, who risked everything to protect me. She squeezed his hand. You're not a monster. You're just someone who's lived a very long time and had to make hard choices. He looked at her finally, and she saw tears in his eyes. Tears of blood, dark and terrible, trailing down his pale cheeks. I don't deserve you. Maybe not, but you've got me anyway. She stood on her toes and kissed him, tasting blood and rain and something else. Something uniquely him. When she pulled back, his eyes were wide with shock. I'm bound to you by oath now, remember? You're stuck with me until death. Jolene. His voice broke on her name, and then he was pulling her close, holding her like she was the only real thing in the world. I would burn the world for you. I want you to know that. If it came down to a choice between you and everything I've built, everything I've worked for, I would choose you. Every time. Good thing it won't come to that, then. She pulled back enough to look at him. But right now, we need to get this evidence back to the court. We need to show them what Draven did, clear your name, and make sure the blood laws stay in place. He nodded slowly, wiping the blood from his face. You're right. We have work to do. They returned to the warehouse where Lysander and the others had gathered samples and photographs. They loaded everything into the cars and drove back to the court as dawn approached. Quillon was silent during the drive, but he kept one hand on Jolene's, his thumb brushing against her palm like he needed the contact to stay grounded. The court was in chaos when they arrived. News of Draven's death had spread, and vampires were gathered in the throne room, arguing, demanding answers. When Quillon entered with Jolene and Lysander behind him, the room fell silent. He walked to the throne without a word, still covered in blood, and sat down. When he spoke, his voice carried the weight of absolute authority. Lord Draven challenged me to single combat. I won. He's dead. His crimes against the court are documented and will be presented now. Lysander stepped forward with the evidence, the photographs, the bottle samples, Jolene's test results. He laid it all out methodically while the court watched. When he finished, the elderly vampire Matthias spoke up. This is damning. Lord Draven poisoned our own people to serve his political goals. He deserved his death. What about the vote? Another vampire called out. To overturn the blood laws? There will be no vote. Quillon's tone left no room for argument. The donation system is sound. The sabotage has been identified and eliminated. The blood laws remain in place, and anyone who disagrees is welcome to challenge me the way Draven did. No one spoke. No one moved. The message was clear. Furthermore, Quillon continued, Jolene McAllister is now the court's official physician. She has proven her value and her loyalty. She will establish testing protocols to ensure the blood supply remains safe, and she will provide medical care to our people as needed. She is under my protection, and anyone who harms her answers to me personally. My lord. A vampire Jolene didn't recognize stepped forward. A human physician is unprecedented. How can we trust? I don't care about precedent. Quillon's eyes blazed. She saved us. All of us. She found the contamination when our own people couldn't. She risked her life entering this court, and she's proven her worth 1,000 times over. If you question her, you question me. The vampire bowed quickly. Of course, my lord. I meant no disrespect. Then we're done here. Get the contaminated bottles out of storage and destroyed. Replace them with clean bottles, tested bottles. And someone find the rest of Draven's conspirators and bring them to me. I want to know everyone who knew about this plot. Quillon stood. Court is dismissed. I'll be in my chambers. Do not disturb me unless the city is burning. He descended from the throne and walked out of the room, leaving a stunned silence behind. Jolene hurried after him, following through the maze of corridors until they reached a set of heavy wooden doors. He pushed them open to reveal his personal chambers. It was beautiful in a stark, masculine way. Stone walls covered in tapestries, a massive bed with dark hangings, shelves filled with books and artifacts from across the centuries. A fireplace with no fire, because vampires didn't need warmth. Windows covered by heavy curtains to block out the sun. Quillon closed the doors behind them and leaned against them, his eyes closed. I need to bathe. I'm covered in blood and ash. I'll help you. She moved to him, and he opened his eyes to look at her. You don't have to. I want to. She started unbuttoning his ruined shirt, her fingers steady. Let me take care of you. You've been taking care of everyone else. He stood still while she undressed him, revealing the pale perfection of his body beneath the blood-stained clothing. The wounds on his chest had healed, leaving no scars. She led him to an adjoining bathroom that was surprisingly modern, with a large shower tiled in dark stone. She turned on the water, let it heat, then guided him under the spray. He stood with his head bowed, letting the water wash away the blood. She stripped off her own clothes and joined him, using soap to clean his skin, washing his long white hair until the water ran clear. He didn't speak, just let her care for him, and she could feel the tension slowly leaving his body. When they were both clean, she turned off the water and wrapped them both in towels. He let her lead him to the bed, and they lay down together, his arms coming around her. The sun would be rising soon, she knew. He'd have to sleep soon, the death sleep of vampires that couldn't be fought. Stay with me, he murmured against her hair. When I sleep, I want to wake up and find you here. I'm not going anywhere. I love you. The words were quiet, almost hesitant. I didn't think I could anymore. But I love you, Jolene. From that first night in the rain, you've been all I could think about. I love you too, she said. And it was true. She'd fallen in love with a vampire king who held umbrellas and built hospitals, who fought monsters and tried to be better than his nature. Sleep. I'll be here when you wake up. He closed his eyes, and within moments his breathing slowed, stopped. The death sleep took him, leaving him cold and still in her arms. She held him anyway, keeping watch as the sun rose outside the curtained windows. The following weeks were chaotic but productive. Jolene set up a proper lab in the court's chambers, modern equipment alongside ancient books of vampire physiology. She established testing protocols for the blood supply, trained a team of vampire assistants, and began documenting everything she learned about vampire medicine. The court members were wary of her at first, but she won them over slowly. She treated their injuries without flinching, answered their medical questions without judgment, and proved that a human could be trusted with their secrets. Lysander became her assistant and friend, helping her navigate vampire politics and protocol. And Quillon was everything. He ruled his court during the nights, dealing with politics and problems, but his free moments were hers. They walked through the cemetery where they'd met, though now they went as lovers instead of strangers. They had dinner together, though he only drank wine while she ate. They talked for hours about everything and nothing, learning each other in all the ways that mattered. 6 months after she'd been bound to the court, Quillon came to her in the lab where she was working late. I have something to show you. She followed him through the corridors to a part of the court she'd never seen before, upstairs that led to a tower. At the top was a room with windows that opened to the night sky, furnished with comfortable chairs and bookshelves. It was beautiful, peaceful, with a view of Lyon's light spreading out below. This was my sanctuary, he said. Where I came when I needed to think, to be alone. I want you to have it, or share it with me if you prefer. It's perfect. She moved to the windows, looking out at the city. I can't believe this is my life now. Working for a vampire court, in love with a king who's 600 years old. He came up behind her, wrapping his arms around her waist. Are you happy? Incredibly. She leaned back against him. But I've been thinking about something, about the future. What about it? You're immortal. I'm not. I'll grow old, die, and you'll go on without me. And I know that's how it works, but... She turned in his arms to face him. I don't want that. I want centuries with you, not decades. His expression went very still. Jolene, what are you saying? Turn me. Make me like you. I want to be with you, really with you, for as long as you'll have me. You don't understand what you're asking. You'd have to die, drink blood, give up the sun forever. I work night shifts already. I barely see the sun as it is. She cupped his face in her hands. And I'm not afraid. I know what you are, what I'd become. I've spent 6 months living among vampires, learning about your kind. I know the reality, and I still want it. I want you. I would have to kill you. His voice was rough. Drain your blood, stop your heart. I'd have to hurt you. And then you'd bring me back, give me your blood, save me. She smiled. You've been saving me since the first night we met. This is just the final step. He closed his eyes, and when he opened them, they were glowing red. If I do this, there's no going back. You'll be bound to me forever, not just by oath but by blood. We'll be connected in ways that go beyond love or marriage. Good. That's what I want. He kissed her then, deeply, desperately, and she tasted the promise in it. Not here, not in the court. I want to do this somewhere that means something to us. They went to the cemetery at midnight, to the spot where they'd first met. The bench, where he'd held an umbrella over her while she cried, where he'd kept her company through the darkest night of her life. It seemed right to die and be reborn there. Jolene wasn't afraid. She lay down on the grass, looking up at the stars, and Quillon knelt beside her. I love you, he said. In all my centuries, I've never loved anyone the way I love you. I'll spend eternity proving it. I know. She reached up to touch his face. I'm ready. He bent to her throat and she felt the pierce of his fangs, sharp and clean. The pain was brief, and then there was just a pulling sensation as her blood left her body. She felt her heartbeat slowing, her vision dimming. The world faded to gray, then black, and she thought she heard him crying, his tears falling on her skin like rain. She died in his arms, there in the cemetery under the stars. And then there was fire, burning through her veins, consuming her from the inside. She felt his blood on her lips, sweet and powerful, and she drank instinctively, desperately. The fire grew hotter, unbearable, and she screamed or thought she did. Everything was pain and heat and transformation. When it ended, she opened her eyes to a world transformed. The darkness was gone, replaced by perfect clarity. She could see every detail of the cemetery, every blade of grass, every texture in the stone. She could hear the city around them, heartbeats and conversations and life pulsing everywhere. She could smell blood, warm and tempting, and the scent of earth and rain. And Quillon, holding her, his eyes wide with wonder. Jolene, can you hear me? I can hear everything. Her voice sounded different, clearer, stronger. She sat up and the movement was effortless, graceful in a way she'd never been before. Is this what it's always like for you? Yes. How do you feel? She took inventory. Stronger, faster, sharper, hungry but not unbearably so, and connected to him in a way that went beyond physical, like she could feel his presence in her mind, his emotions echoing with hers. Alive. More alive than I've ever been. He laughed, and it was pure relief and joy. You're beautiful. You were always beautiful, but now. He touched her hair, and she realized it had changed, turned white like his, like all vampires. You look like you belong to the night. I belong to you. She kissed him, and it was different now, equal. She could feel his strength, but she had her own to match it. Forever. Forever, he agreed. They went back to the court together as the sun began to rise, two white-haired figures moving through the darkness. The court members saw the change immediately, saw what she'd become, and there was shock and speculation and whispered conversations. But Quillon silenced them all with a single look, leading Jolene to his chambers where they'd sleep through the day. The months that followed were an adjustment. Jolene had to learn to control her new strength, her new senses, the hunger for blood that never quite went away, but she had Quillon to guide her, patient and loving, teaching her everything she needed to know. And she had her work, establishing the first mixed clinic for humans and vampires, a place where both species could receive care. The clinic opened a year after her turning, in a building funded by Les Ombres Éternelles and staffed by both human and vampire medical professionals. It was unprecedented, revolutionary, and it changed everything. Humans who knew about vampires could come for help without fear, and vampires could receive treatment without hiding. The blood donation system expanded, becoming a true partnership instead of a secret transaction. The night of the clinic's opening, there was a celebration in the court. The throne room was filled with vampires and humans, a sight that would have been unthinkable a year before. Jolene stood in the center of it all, wearing a gown of deep blue, her white hair braided with silver, and Quillon was beside her, his hand at her back, his presence steady and warm. "You did this," he murmured in her ear. "You changed everything. We did this, together." She turned to smile at him. "This is what you've been working toward for centuries, isn't it? True coexistence. Peace between our kinds. It was always the goal. But I never thought I'd see it happen. Never thought I'd find someone who could help me build it." He pulled her closer. "And I never thought I'd find love again. But here you are, my queen, my physician, my partner in all things." "Queen?" She raised an eyebrow. "Is that a proposal?" "If you'll have me." He produced a ring from somewhere, a band of dark metal set with a single diamond that caught the light like a star. "Marry me, Jolene. Rule beside me, not as my subject, but as my equal. Let me spend eternity loving you." She didn't have to think about it. Yes, 1,000 times yes. He slipped the ring on her finger, and the court erupted in applause and cheers. Lysander whistled loudly, and Matthias called for wine to toast the engagement. The celebration went on until dawn, humans and vampires drinking and dancing together, a new era beginning. When the sun rose and the humans left, Quillon took Jolene up to their tower room to watch the city wake up from behind the curtained windows. They sat together in the darkness that was their day, and she felt perfectly content. "Do you ever miss it?" he asked quietly. "The sun, being human." "Sometimes," she admitted. "But I wouldn't trade this for anything. I have you, I have work that matters, I have forever to learn and grow and help people. The sun seems like a small price to pay for all of that." "You're extraordinary." "I'm just a woman who was crying in a cemetery when a vampire king offered her an umbrella." She smiled at the memory. "Best night of my life." "Mine too." He kissed her forehead, gentle and reverent. "I was so lost before I found you. Going through the motions of ruling, of existing, but not really living. You gave me purpose again. Hope. You did the same for me. I was drowning in grief and loneliness, and you just stayed. You didn't try to fix me or tell me it would be okay. You just held an umbrella and stayed. I'll always stay." His arms tightened around her. "Through everything, for all of eternity, I'll stay." They were married a month later in the cemetery where they'd met, a small ceremony with the court as witnesses. Jolene wore white and Quillon wore black, and when they exchanged vows under the stars, it felt like the universe itself was blessing their union. The years that followed were good. The clinic thrived, expanding to other cities. The blood laws were strengthened with protections that Jolene helped write, ensuring fair treatment for both donors and vampires. The court flourished under their joint leadership, Quillon handling politics and strategy, while Jolene managed medical matters and human relations. They faced challenges, of course. There were vampires who resented the changes, who wanted a return to the old ways. There were humans who feared vampires despite the peace treaties. But together, they navigated every obstacle, united in their vision of a better world. And every night, no matter how busy they were, they took time to walk through the cemetery where they'd met, To sit on their bench and remember the rain, the umbrella, the moment when two lonely souls found each other in the darkness. 50 years after her turning, Jolene stood in that cemetery with Quillon at her side, looking at the newly installed plaque on their bench. It read, "In memory of the night that changed everything, where mercy met despair and love was born from darkness." "It's perfect," she said softly. "A reminder for everyone who comes here that good things can come from the darkest moments. You were my good thing." Quillon pulled her close, and she leaned into his embrace. "You still are, every single night. And you were mine." She turned to kiss him, sweet and familiar. "My vampire king who saved me with an umbrella. Best decision I ever made." They stood there in the darkness, two immortal beings who'd found something more precious than eternity. They'd found each other. And as they walked back to the court hand in hand, their white hair gleaming in the starlight, they knew that whatever the future held, they'd face it together. Forever. The cemetery remained their place, a sanctuary where they could be just Quillon and Jolene, not king and queen, not vampire and physician. Just two people who'd met in the rain and built a love that transcended death itself. Years turned to decades, decades to centuries. The world changed around them, technology advancing, societies transforming. But the court endured, and so did their work. The clinic grew into a network of facilities across Europe, a model for human-vampire cooperation that other courts began to emulate. The blood laws became international treaties, protecting both species under a framework of mutual respect and benefit. Jolene never regretted her choice to become a vampire. She missed the sun sometimes, missed the warmth of daylight on her skin, but she had something far more valuable, endless time to make a difference, to help people, to love and be loved. She had Quillon, constant and devoted, the anchor that kept her grounded through the centuries. And on quiet nights when the work was done and the court was sleeping, they'd return to the cemetery, to the spot where he'd held an umbrella over her while she cried, where he'd offered comfort without asking for anything in return, where a connection had formed that would span the ages. They'd sit on their bench and remember, and they'd be grateful, grateful for the rain that had brought them together, for the choices they'd made, for the love they'd found in the darkness. And if sometimes other people found them there, couples seeking advice, vampires needing guidance, humans looking for hope, Quillon and Jolene would share their story. They'd talk about that first night, about building trust and love across impossible divides, about finding light in the darkest places, because that's what they'd done. Two lonely souls in a cemetery, one holding an umbrella, one crying in the rain. And from that small act of kindness, from that moment of connection, had grown something beautiful and enduring. A love story for the ages, a partnership that changed the world. A reminder that even in our darkest hours, when we're alone and lost and grieving, there's always the possibility of hope, of someone appearing with an umbrella, offering shelter from the storm, asking nothing in return but the chance to stay. And sometimes, if we're very lucky, that moment becomes forever. Jolene looked at Quillon, her vampire king, her husband, her partner in all things. His white hair shone in the starlight, his dark eyes reflecting the love she felt mirrored in her own heart. "Tell me again," she said, smiling, "about the first night, when you decided to hold an umbrella over a crying stranger." "I saw you sitting there in the rain," he said, his voice soft with memory. "And you looked so alone, so lost, and I remembered what it felt like, that loneliness. I'd lived with it for centuries. I thought maybe I could help, even just for a moment. You did more than help. You saved me. We saved each other." He took her hand, bringing it to his lips. "You gave me a reason to be more than just a king going through the motions. You reminded me what it meant to be alive, even in death. You are my everything, Jolene. And you are mine." She stood, pulling him to his feet. "Come on, let's go home. We have eternity ahead of us, but right now I just want to be with you." They walked together through the cemetery gates, leaving the past behind while carrying it with them in their hearts. The night was beautiful, full of stars and possibility, and they had forever to explore it together. Forever, born from a single moment of compassion in the rain. Forever, built on trust and love, and the choice to be better than your nature demands. Forever, shared by a vampire king and the human woman who became his equal, his partner, his heart. It was more than either of them had dreamed possible, and it was theirs. The story could end there, with them walking into the night hand in hand. But their story never really ended. It just continued, night after night, year after year, century after century. A love that death couldn't touch. A partnership that changed the world. A reminder that sometimes the darkest moments lead to the brightest futures. All because a vampire king saw a woman crying alone in the rain, and instead of walking away, he stopped. He opened an umbrella. He stayed, and everything changed.